The blood on the marble is still warm, not because the palace is cruel by nature, but because Rome is always in a hurry to replace a man the moment he stops breathing, and Livia Marcella understands that before she even dares to stand. Only minutes ago she was Augusta, wrapped in imperial purple, a woman whose name opened gates and silenced rooms, the kind of figure poets described from a distance and senators bowed to with careful smiles. But now she is kneeling beside the still body of Gaius Aurelius Maximus, and the title on her shoulders feels less like a crown and more like a target painted on cloth. The chamber smells of perfume she chose for a dinner that will never happen, and beneath it the sharper metal scent of sudden death, and through the thick walls she hears the sound that matters most in Rome. Boots moving together, not servants, not messengers, but disciplined men who are already taking positions, as if the palace itself is a battlefield. She has seen this rhythm before, on parade days, on nights when the city feared riots, on mornings when the emperor wanted to remind the Senate who truly kept order. But tonight, the sound is different. Colder, faster, the kind of movement that does not protect, only secures. When the door finally opens, it is not with the hesitation of grief, but with the confidence of ownership. And Lucius Cassius Nerva steps inside wearing the armor of the Praetorian Guard and the red cloak of a prefect, the uniform of a man who can turn a whisper into a law. His face is familiar from banquets and ceremonies, yet in this light it looks carved from calculation. And when he speaks, he does not say murder or assassination. He says illness, as if language itself is a tool he controls. He offers condolences with a calm that feels rehearsed, then tells her the story Rome will be fed by morning. A sudden fever, a peaceful end, a successor named with a final breath. And with each sentence he is not describing the past. He is building the future, brick by brick, before anyone else can protest. Livia tries to keep her voice steady, because fear is a scent predators notice. And she asks the question that decides whether she lives as a person or becomes a problem. What happens to the emperor's widow? Nerva's answer does not need details to be terrifying. He speaks of the interregnum, the hours before the next ruler arrives, and he says it like a private season in Rome's calendar, a season not written in any law, but understood by every man who holds a blade. 72 hours, he explains, perhaps more or less, during which the guard controls the palace, the corridors, the gates, and everything that moves inside them, and Livia realizes that her world has narrowed to a single night and a single bargain. He wants information records, names, lists, evidence her husband kept close because secrets are the only currency that can buy safety when power is changing hands. And when she hesitates, he does not raise his voice or threaten loudly. He simply lets silence do the work, and mentions traditional methods for dealing with the households of fallen emperors. Methods history rarely names, methods whispered about by women who learned to fear sudden funerals. Before he leaves, he adds one more knife without touching her. Her stepdaughter and the women of the private household are being taken for questioning, and their fate, he says, will depend on Livia's cooperation. The lock clicks behind him, the boots outside settle into their posts, and the palace becomes a cage built in real time. Livia stands at last, blood-stained, shaking, and begins to think like someone who has survived Rome long enough to know a hidden truth. Emperors die in public, but empresses are erased in private. And what happens in the next 8 hours will decide whether she disappears like so many names in the margins of old texts, or whether she finds a secret powerful enough to make the hunters hesitate. The silence after the door locks is heavier than the shouting of a mob, because it tells Livia Marcella that Rome has already moved on from grief to procedure. In procedure is where mercy goes to die. She understands now what the prefect meant by the interregnum, not as a legal gap, but as a shadowed interval, where rules exist only for those strong enough to enforce them. And for imperial women, that interval has always been the most dangerous moment of all. Rome loved to celebrate continuity, to pretend that power flowed smoothly from one ruler to the next. But beneath that polished story lived an older understanding passed quietly from household to household, from mother to daughter, from frightened slave to trembling noblewoman. When an emperor died, protection died with him, and the men who had been forbidden to touch suddenly remembered every resentment they had swallowed. Livia had heard fragments of these stories before, carefully wrapped in euphemism, dismissed as exaggerations, labeled gossip by historians who preferred clean timelines and male ambitions. But now those fragments align into something solid and terrifying. The Guard was not waiting for orders from the Senate or the gods. They were waiting for dawn, for midnight, for the moment when patience ended and entitlement began. She moves away from her husband's body because she knows staying will change nothing. And as she walks through chambers, once filled with laughter and music, she notices how quickly loyalty evaporates, how servants avert their eyes, how familiar faces pretend not to recognize her, because survival in Rome has always depended on knowing when to forget. Every corridor reminds her of what she has lost, but also of what she still has: knowledge. Her husband had been cautious, almost paranoid, because he knew the Guard's reputation as well as anyone, and in quieter evenings he had spoken to her not as a decorative wife, but as a partner, explaining how emperors fell not to enemies at the borders, but to men standing close enough to smell their breath. Those conversations now echo in her mind with brutal clarity, especially the warnings about records, about lists kept hidden, about truths too dangerous to exist openly. She realizes that the Guard's threats are not random cruelty, but a system refined over generations, a way to strip imperial households of resistance before anyone can object. And she understands why the histories grow vague at this point, why widows are said to retire or withdraw, because describing what truly happened would force Rome to confront its own appetite for silence. Somewhere in the palace, her stepdaughter is being questioned. Her fear measured her. Answers weighed not for truth, but for usefulness. And Livia feels the pull of panic tighten around her chest, yet she forces herself to breathe slowly, because panic is a luxury she cannot afford. She begins to calculate, not as a grieving wife, but as a survivor inside a machine designed to crush hesitation. And she sees the outline of a narrow path that might still exist. The palace is full of secrets built into its walls, passages meant to move emperors unseen, rooms designed for whispers and betrayals. And if the Guard believes fear will freeze her in place, they have misunderstood the kind of woman Rome has trained her to be. She reaches the edge of the imperial apartments and pauses, listening to the sounds of boots fading and returning, mapping movement in her mind like a general studying enemy patrols. And in that moment, she makes a decision that history will never record plainly. She will not wait for midnight. She will not beg. If Rome has a darkest secret, she will find it first, because in a city where power feeds on forgetting, the only defense left to an empress without an emperor is to remember everything and use it before the night decides for her. The hidden door behind the tapestry opens with a softness that feels almost obscene after the violence of the last hour, and as Livia Marcella slips into the narrow passage, she understands why emperors trusted stone and silence more than men. The corridor smells of oil and dust, of secrets maintained by slaves who were paid to forget what they cleaned. And each step she takes away from the guarded chambers feels like a small theft from fate itself. This was her husband's private world, a network of vests, movement designed not for comfort, but for survival. And as she moves through it, she remembers how he once showed it to her in a moment of rare honesty, telling her that power in Rome depended less on visibility than on the ability to disappear at the right time. Above her, the palace continues its performance of order, servants whispering, guards shifting posts, grief being staged for an audience that has not yet arrived. But down here, Rome's true nature breathes freely, mechanical, and indifferent. She reaches the private study without encountering anyone, though she knows that luck is not a plan, and that time is tightening around her like a cord. The room is small, windowless, and deliberately unremarkable, built to avoid attention. and in its center stands the cedar cabinet her husband guarded more fiercely than his jewels. Her hands shake as she opens it, not from fear alone, but from the weight of what she expects to find. And the scrolls inside are arranged with the careful precision of a man who knew exactly how he would be remembered if he failed. Names, accounts, coded notes, quiet accusations preserved in ink and wax, each one a fragment of a larger truth Rome never wanted assembled in one place. She scans them quickly, rejecting what no longer matters, because evidence against a future emperor will not save her tonight, and grudges against senators mean nothing while soldiers control the halls. Then she finds what changes the air in the room, records that trace missing funds, diverted payments, donatives shaved thin before they reach the hands of common soldiers, and the name tied to every calculation is the one she expected and feared. Lucius Cassius Nerva had not only betrayed an emperor, he had betrayed his own men, and Livia understands at once why this knowledge is more dangerous than any blade. The guard survives on loyalty, bought with gold and tradition, and a prefect who steals from that bond becomes expendable the moment the truth surfaces. She takes the scrolls, feeling their weight settle against her body like armor made of paper. But the sense of control lasts only seconds before she hears footsteps in the passage, measured and confident, not the wandering curiosity of servants, but the direct approach of men who know where they are going. The guard has learned these corridors too, through patience and purchase, through years of watching and listening, and her advantage collapses as quickly as it appeared. Panic threatens to rise, but training and necessity push it down, and she searches the room for the last option her husband had prepared for himself and never expected her to use. The escape shaft is narrow, brutal, and honest in a way palaces never are. A vertical wound in the architecture that leads downward into darkness and uncertainty, but it is movement, and movement is life. She tucks the scrolls close, scrapes her hands on stone, tears silk on rough edges, and descends into the unseen parts of Rome, just as voices reach the study behind her. When she finally drops into the tunnel below, surrounded by damp air and the smell of waste, she understands the cruel symmetry of the moment. The Empress of Rome has become invisible by crawling into the city, slowest arteries, carrying secrets powerful enough to destroy the men hunting her, while above ground the palace closes ranks and prepares to pretend she never existed at all. The tunnel releases Livia Marcella into open air with a shock that almost brings her to her knees, not because she is free, but because she has emerged into the one place in Rome where power hesitates. The courtyard is quiet, stone-washed pale by torchlight, and for a moment she does not recognize it until the shape of the temple settles into her. Vision and understanding follows like a slow breath. This is the precinct of Vesta, where the eternal flame burns, where laws older than emperors still command obedience, and where even armed men lower their voices. She pulls herself fully from the great, filthy, bleeding, stripped of every symbol of imperial authority except her name, and collapses onto the stone as if the ground itself might judge whether she is worthy to stand. Footsteps approach, but they are measured and unarmed, and when the woman in white robes appears, her expression holds neither surprise nor fear, only the calm of someone who has watched Rome survive by bending rather than breaking. The Virgo Maxima studies Livia with eyes trained to see through titles and desperation alike, and when she speaks the word Augusta, it sounds less like flattery and more like a test of whether the title still has meaning. Livia claims sanctuary without ceremony, because ritual matters less than survival, and she tells the truth plainly. The emperor is dead, the guard controls the palace, and the prefect who murdered her husband is searching for her. The priestess listens without interruption, because listening is a form of power, then leads her inside were stone walls, and sacred objects create a silence that feels different from the palace's heavier, more deliberate. Here, secrets are not accidents, they are preserved. Livia washes, changes into plain white garments that erase her rank, and feels the humiliation of it even as she understands the necessity, because blending in is safer than standing out. When the scrolls are laid between them, the air changes again, and the Virgo Maxima does not touch them, as if contact alone might alter the balance they represent. She understands at once what Livia has brought and why it matters, and she speaks openly of things Rome pretends not to know. The interregnum, the privileges the Guard claims, the fate of imperial women who fail to secure protection quickly enough. There is no moral outrage in her voice, only realism sharpened by centuries of survival. And when she offers help, it comes with conditions stated clearly, because favors without prices do not exist at this level of power. The Vestals will shelter Livia, provide a messenger, guide her through the invisible networks that still move beneath Rome's rigid surface. But in return, they want guarantees that will outlast the next emperor, protections written into law before memory can soften. Livia recognizes the transaction for what it is, cold and necessary, and agrees without pretending it is anything else, because she has learned that virtue alone does not keep women alive when men are trading thrones. A letter is drafted, a messenger chosen, and plans are made with the efficiency of people who know hesitation kills faster than swords. As the young man slips away into the city, carrying words that could shatter a prefect, Power Livia is left to wait in a room that smells of oil and ash, thinking of midnight, of her stepdaughter, of the palace she can never safely return to. Sanctuary has bought her time, not peace, and as the flame burns steadily nearby, she understands that even here, in the safest place Rome allows, survival depends not on prayer, but on whether her gamble reaches the right hands before the night decides her fate. Night deepens over Rome in a way that feels deliberate, as if the city itself is holding its breath while waiting to see who will still matter by dawn. And inside the sanctuary, Livia Marcella measures time by the flicker of the sacred flame and the ache in her body that refuses to let her rest. Every sound beyond the temple walls feels amplified, a footstep that might mean discovery, a distant shout that might signal the Guard, tightening its search, and with each passing moment, the threat of midnight grows heavier because she knows that traditions do not require witnesses to be enforced. The Virgo Maxima moves through the precinct with practiced calm, issuing quiet instructions, maintaining the appearance of ritual continuity, because the greatest defense of sacred places has always been the illusion that nothing unusual is happening inside them. Livia understands now that this calm is not kindness, but discipline, the same discipline that has allowed priestesses to survive emperors, invasions, and purges by never appearing to challenge power directly. She thinks of the letter moving through the city, concealed among ordinary tasks, and wonders how many lives in Rome depend on invisible people doing invisible work while powerful men argue over destiny. The waiting becomes its own form of punishment because imagination fills the silence with images. She cannot dismiss her stepdaughter alone among soldiers trained to break resistance. The women of the household learning how quickly status dissolves once protection is gone, and she fights the urge to run, knowing that leaving sanctuary now would undo everything she has risked. The priestess eventually returns with news that the messenger has reached the outer edge of the Praetorian camp, not confirmation of success, only proof that the plan is still alive, and that fragile hope is enough to keep Livia steady for another hour. As the night wears on, she learns more of the unspoken rules Rome pretends not to teach, how certain men in the Guard resent the prefect's rise, how loyalty is often less about ideology than about being treated fairly, and how a single piece of evidence can fracture a force that appears united from the outside. When distant horns sound, announcing a shift of watch, Livia realizes that the Guard is reorganizing, not because they fear the Senate or the people, but because someone inside their ranks may already be asking questions. Then, near the edge of midnight, a knock comes that does not echo with authority, but with caution, and the Virgo Maxima receives a message without ceremony, reading it once before handing it to Livia. The response is brief, written with the confidence of a man who understands what has been offered and what it could cost him to ignore it. and it promises action, not out of mercy, but out of shared interest. Relief threatens to soften Livia's resolve, but she knows better than to celebrate early, because Rome rarely grants clean victories, only exchanges of danger. Even if the prefect is challenged, even if the guard turns inward, the next emperor will still arrive, and he will want explanations that preserve his authority and bury embarrassment. The sanctuary grows quieter as the night advances, and Livia feels the weight of what she has become, not a grieving widow, not a passive victim, but a woman holding a truth dangerous enough to force armed men to hesitate. She does not know yet whether she has saved herself or merely delayed the inevitable. But as the first signs of disorder ripple through the city beyond the temple walls, she understands that the darkest secret of Rome is no longer entirely hidden, and once revealed, even partially, it begins to reshape the choices of everyone who hoped it would remain buried. Dawn arrives without ceremony, pale light spilling over Rome as if nothing extraordinary has happened. And that indifference is what finally teaches Livia Marcella the deepest truth about the city she once ruled beside an emperor. Power does not mourn, it adjusts. By the time the sun touches the rooftops, rumors are already moving faster than orders, whispers traveling through barracks and alleys, changing the way men look at one another. And inside the Praetorian camp, loyalty begins to fracture along invisible lines. The prefect's authority no longer feels absolute, not because he has been defeated, but because doubt has entered a system that survives only on certainty, and doubt is contagious. Livia does not witness this directly yet. She feels it in the sudden quiet around the temple, in the way guards posted nearby keep their distance, in the careful neutrality that replaces the hunger she sensed earlier in the night. When word finally reaches the sanctuary that the prefect has been confined for his own protection, pending internal review, the phrasing is almost elegant in its dishonesty, and Livia recognizes it as Rome's favorite tool, the lie that allows violence to look like procedure. There is no public arrest, no proclamation of guilt, only a silent removal, because the guard cannot admit that its own traditions nearly tore it apart. Her safety is secured not by justice, but by convenience, and that realization hardens something inside her. Soon after, messengers announce the approach of the new emperor, his march orderly, his arrival inevitable, and the city begins rehearsing loyalty once again, banners prepared, statements refined, grief repackaged into legitimacy. Livia is summoned not to the palace, but to a controlled audience arranged to ensure there are no surprises. And when she stands before the man who will rule Rome, she understands that survival now requires a different kind of silence. He speaks kindly, expresses regret, praises her dignity, and offers her a future defined by withdrawal, by distance, by forgetting, because forgetting is how Rome heals itself. She accepts publicly, because a refusal would be read as defiance, but privately she ensures that agreements are written, witnessed, and bound by obligations that cannot be erased without consequence. Her life after this will be smaller, quieter, stripped of spectacle, yet it will be hers, and that alone is a victory Rome did not intend to grant. As the days pass, the women of the imperial household disappear from public view, recorded in histories as having retired, remarried, or vanished into obscurity, and no chronicler asks what those first hours were like or what bargains were struck to make disappearance possible. Livia becomes one of those footnotes, her name fading into safe ambiguity, but she knows what was traded to achieve that outcome and who paid the unseen price. Rome moves forward, as it always does, built on erased suffering and carefully managed memory, and the Praetorian Guard resumes its watch as if nothing was ever wrong. Yet beneath the marble and ceremony, the truth lingers past quietly among those who survive long enough to learn it, that during the moments when power changes hands, the law steps aside and the city reveals its most honest face. Livia Marcella lives because she understood that secret and acted before it could consume her. And history remains silent, not because nothing happened, but because Rome has always depended on silence to keep its darkest traditions intact.